So let's talk about investing from last year. We did a panel on investment last year, and not everybody was on the panel. I think you two, correct? Why don't you each sort of talk about what you think the big change has been in the last year in investing, specifically looking at diversity and other issues. Why don't we start with you, Victoria?
Sure. Well, I can speak for what we're doing at Astia, and in the past year we've made tremendous strides that we're really focused on international investing. And I think, Adam, you gave the statistic the other day that about 70% of angel investing is in one's own backyard. And we're really looking to change that at Astia. Just as diversity on a founding team makes a tremendous difference, we believe that when you get investors from Europe and the East Coast and the West Coast investing together and talking about deals together and assessing deals together, you're going to make better investment decisions, and you're also going to open yourself up to incredible opportunities that otherwise you're missing out on. So in the past year, we've really focused on expanding where we're investing and expanding our angel membership into Europe, and really making strides in that area.
Okay, Sharon?
Nothing's changed, Kara. There's a lot of noise, and it's lovely to hear, I don't know, John Doerr saying he's going to mentor some more women. I haven't seen anything substantially change. I think the dialogue maybe has gotten a bit louder, and I do think that some people who didn't know the statistics are now able to quote them pretty well. I don't see anything changing yet.
Claudia?
Yeah, I totally agree. So the issue is, actually in the last 12 months, I think people have made some really stupid statements that have caused a lot of noise. Actually, that's beneficial because it just highlights the problem.
The stupidest being, there's so many to pick from.
So many, so many. To quote one, I love the quote from a well-known VC who said he asked the same woman, potential partner, 11 times to be a partner at his fund, and she said no, so he pretty much gave up. And, to me, 11 times, that's almost stalking. So he kind of hasn't gotten it. I think, I actually do think LPs, so investors in funds, are starting to ask the question, but they're so timid, right? They're so worried about missing out their allocation in Sequoia or KKR or Andreessen. So they don't actually require and put mandates on the table. And honestly, the point that Raj made yesterday is if talk doesn't get you there, eventually you need quotas. And what it's going to take to change the number of women, senior women VCs, is investors who say, I'm not investing in this fund unless you have at least one woman at the table. So I think there's a lot of talk. I hope the investors get there. They're not there yet.
Well, a couple of things come to mind, and I'd agree with it. There's more talk, but not much action. I think in terms of things that have changed since last year, one thing I'd highlight is the Ellen Powell verdict, which is probably a panel of itself, working out whether that was plus or minus, created a lot of noise, but didn't really clarify the situation, at least raise the discussion. I think one thing that's changed, which I see more, is focus on what's called intersectionality. That's a function of, for example, people calling out the Grace Hopper Conference for not being a conference for women in technology, but a conference for elite white women in technology. And at the risk of quoting more bad statistics, Catherine Finney from Digital Undivided estimates that there are only 15 companies in the US founded by black women that have raised $1 million. That's 15 ever with black women CEOs. And I think the other thing that's changed, which...
I'm having coffee with 3 of them when I get back to San Francisco. But
it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing that's changed in the sort of context of noise, and this is both startup tech investing and big tech, is like everybody talks about unconscious bias. Like every conference has to have a session on unconscious bias. And it worries me that that's often put out there as like the magic solution, silver bullet, and if we all do unconscious bias training, then everything's okay. But it isn't.
I call them sensitive new age flowers of men in Silicon Valley who are like, I can't believe you think I'm a sexist. And I'm like, and yet I do.
Get over it.
Honestly, some days I'd rather have Trump because there he's just saying what they're thinking in the back of their head. And I don't want Trump, by the way. And all apologies to everyone in Europe, although, frankly, Boris is really winning the prize this week on that issue. But talk a bit about that unconscious bias. Why do you think it happens besides just generalized misogyny across the globe since the beginning of time?
Well,
I actually don't think they can get away with saying it's unconscious.
Yeah.
Today, with the amount of talk about this, if you don't have women partners in your fund, it's a conscious bias.
That's right.
There's no excuse for that.
Right.
Where I think unconscious bias comes into place is women self-select themselves out of the industry.
Yeah.
And that's just education. We need to explain to them that this is a great industry. You should enter it. It's phenomenal. I've got the best friggin' job on the planet. You know, this is a great industry to come into. So the guys who are partners, who have no women, and they've got, you know, more than 5 partners, even more than 3 partners, and not a single woman there, that's just bias. It's not unconscious, it's just bias.
When you sing that quote, it was interesting you picked out that one quote I've asked 11 times, very funny stalker thing. Though stalking is not funny, men, okay? We don't like it, just FYI. But one of the things that I did notice, though, is it does happen. I know a handful of women, and there's a small group of them that get asked to be VCs.
Right. But they're already VCs.
No, they're not. There's a group of women that I happen to know have been approached by lots of big VCs,
Okay.
including
Well,
Andreessen
that's good.
Horowitz. They always ask the same 4, but
Right.
those people get offered operational jobs, and they don't want to be a VC. The one, they don't like the time horizon. 2, why would you want to be in a single woman in a group of men? Why would you like the massaging? You know, stuff like that. And so when they get an operating role, they want to do an operating role.
Right.
And so talk a little bit about that. Keep talking about unconscious bias, but
Yeah, I actually think venture's broken in a lot of ways, and gender just is the most glaring way. But it has a lot of problems. You know, when you invite women into the party, we start to ask tough questions. And we're not always as fun because we don't like strippers. Or maybe we do, but we don't want to do it at work. You know, we want to do it in other places. Or maybe we don't have martinis before 4 o'clock, but we do after 6 o'clock, and that's inconvenient too. But I just think venture has a lot of structural issues, not the least of which is most LPs, specifically in the family office space, will say that there are serious misalignments between LPs and GPs, right? The incentives for GPs are so disproportionate to the returns to LPs. You tell that to any of the GPs in Silicon Valley, and they, A, don't believe you, and B, think that what you've just said validates that they're great, that they're awesome. You know, there is very little self-reflection in venture. That's my observation. And there is very little room for discussion of things that are not accepted myths and accepted briefs.
so Victoria, go ahead.
At this point, I would like to talk about canaries.
All
Can
right,
I do that?
if you insist.
Yeah.
We're talking canaries.
I'm going to talk
Canaries.
about canaries.
Dare to talk
So
canaries.
I like this analogy because I think it's pretty relevant and it brings out a couple of things. So miners used to take canaries down the mine, right? And sometimes the canaries would die. So what did the miners do when the canaries died? Did they say, those damn canaries, they're not fit enough, they're not strong enough, they don't do whatever? They didn't do that. Did they say, oh, well, we need more canaries, we need a pipeline, we need to build a pipeline of canaries, we've got a pipeline of strong canaries, we'll be fine? They didn't say that. They say, in a self-reflective 1 second before they start running like hell, they say, oh, the canary has died. It's not the canary's fault. The issue is not to fix the canary, it is to fix the atmosphere, because the canary was killed by the atmosphere. And in an organization, including potentially an industry and at a micro level of VC, the atmosphere is the culture of the company.
Right.
And essentially, to something that Judith Williams talked about, if you've got an industry and groups within the industry that are not inclusive to particular groups, those canaries will die. They will just leave. They
Right,
will
I can't
self-select out, but they are being poisoned
Yeah.
by the bad atmosphere.
What are the solutions to it? Is it education? Is it consistently talking about
No,
it? Is it
It's a mixture of everything, but you need quotas in this industry.
right?
You
Which
need
don't seem like they're going to
policymakers.
do that in the U.S. I can tell you
No,
that.
but you know, there are these pension funds where 52% of the money in those pension funds are contributed by women. And where are their stakeholders saying, hey, I think it's ridiculous that 0.2% of this fund is actually managed by women. So, you know, I think you need the change to
So
be
where
driven
does the
from
pressure
within.
go on investors? I understand that's a nice thing to say, but most of those stakeholders just want to make money. They don't care how it's done. And if they get into Facebook early or Snapchat early, they'll
That's
take.
true, but that's where
I
actually
actually think
politicians and governments
Yeah, I think it
actually
rise-
need to show leadership,
Yeah.
right?
But it
They're-
also rises to the level of a fiduciary from an LP perspective. If I'm CalPERS and I've been investing in funds that have not been performing well for me, which, by the way, is the case for CalPERS, CalSTRS, you name it, don't I have some obligation to try something different? Don't I have an obligation to actually look at the data that shows that companies that have women on the founding teams, specifically venture firms, private equity groups that have women on their investment committees and women in the portfolio outperform? Doesn't that rise to fiduciary? And I'm getting indignant with you, Kara, but I want to say this to the CalPERS and the CalSTRS. I am so fed up with the fact that we have had the data for 15 years that businesses outperform with this, and yet no one in positions of power and money have bothered to turn that into an actionable, check the box, it must be there because God damn it, they outperform.
Want to be in the audience next time? Click here for tickets to Inspirefest 2017.